Just want to make probably a quick video on what the river of fire is missing. I mean, it's basically, even though I like the book, right, it's not entirely bad. It does have an aspect of apocastasis in it, which is good. And even the book, The River of Fire, by Alexandre Calamiros. You know, I was on Orpha Globos' video on the heaven and hell according to orthodoxy, right? Yeah, and then yeah, it actually still even it's able to still create or cause converts, right? To cause people to convert even to the church, right? And so it's not entirely bad. It's just I feel like it's the reason what it's missing. The reason why like I only partially accept it is because it just gets the eternal fire of God wrong, you know. Because I think it's trying to reconcile this idea about never-ending suffering being our cause when that's not possible. Eternal suffering, it'll always be the cause of God, really. And this book kind of proved that point. I had a lot of passages that I want to go over, but it was really the idea that, you know, it's called itself the River of Fire, but it doesn't seem to, it seems to be missing just that, the River of Fire. Yeah, because in the Bible, you know, it's clearly depicted as a refiner's fire, you know, and I'll put all the video on the description of the passages as God's fire being refining. Yeah, and that is what would be worthy of eternal hell, right? Being called eternal fire, you know, a fire that is of higher quality, purpose, and you know, it's that's what would live up to the name of the eternal hell of God. And I think he confuses condemnation, self-condemnation with the eternal fire. Like maybe just like he says, but there's really three types of fire though. There's the fires of spiritual illness, which is due to sin, death, and Satan, and those fires, right, of hell, they destroy what's good, and they destroy, you know, they destroy basically what is good, and they corrupt, and they cause spiritual illnesses, and they keep man separate from God. You see what I mean? So that would be the hellfire of the devil. There's the hellfire of self-condemnation, which I agree. I mean, St. Peter experienced that when he said, Lord, I am not worthy of you, right? And Adam even experienced shame and stuff like that when his eyes were open, and that's what I'm saying. They're trying to hide from God. They grew fearful of God, you know. So they were perceiving God, you know, differently, the way they should not have, you know. But God doesn't, his presence does not magnify, you know, sin. You know, it doesn't make spiritual illnesses worse. You see what I mean? It actually kills spiritual illnesses. And self-condemnation would cease, because it would be just like a branch in the tree. It would produce dead fruits, which is wicked works, which have no eternal value. You see what I mean? That's why when it talks about like it, I mean, that's basically what I'm trying to tell you, is that the refining fire of God, a refiner's fire, crucible of God, it does not preserve evil. It destroys it. It does not make evil worse or less eternal. It doesn't give eternal value or quality to evil. That's why it must be ended, you know. And so it is, because it's not good. Eternal fire is eternal goodness. That is God. That is why the smoke of their torment and the lake of fire, right, can also be translated as testing. You know, the smoke of their torment, the smoke of their testing, constant refinement. I mean, you know, the idea is that the eternal fire of God, right, the eternal hell of God, destroys hell itself, you know, destroys spiritual illnesses, destroys death, destroys it eternally separates only the conditions of spiritual death and death itself, and spiritual illnesses and sin and wickedness. All that is dead works. They create branches in the tree that produce dead works, foul fruit. All that is broken off and cast to the fire of God, and is purified, and it ceases to exist. It is just like a refiner's fire. Gold is put into the refiner's fire. The impurities is sin. The gold is the likeness and image of Christ, that deified humanity. That's what I'm saying. When it's put through the testing and fires of eternal fire, right? Only that which is gold is maintained and preserved. Everything else is burnt away and destroyed, and is never seen again. And so it does not consume holy things. Holy fire destroys unholiness. That's how it works. Nothing unholy can approach holiness, because it is killed. That is the eternal fire of God. That is the river fire of God. That is the refining fire of God. Everyone has to go through this kind of fire to be made worthy. Christ said, let this cup pass from me, but nevertheless, right, your will be done, not my own. That's what I'm trying to tell you, that God's will be done, not your own. Because and before I get to the book, I was kind of getting into an argument with this Orthodox, I think it was Russian Orthodox, on Orthoglobos video, Heaven and Hell, according to the Orthodox tradition or something like that. And I think Orthoglobos, he accepts the river of fire. He was describing it. And then I think those are the Russian Orthodox who did not accept it, right? That it's false. And he pointed out the same problem that I was talking about. I was talking about how this book claims to respect the free will of man, right? But what he ends up doing is, what God ends up doing is he ceases being a purifying fire and no longer chastises, and he actually ends up uniting man to himself, and actually gives man the incorruption, and he says they're all in the kingdom. All of the dogs, the ungodly, are in the kingdom, partaking of the tree of life without any purification, and I don't know, and God just lets them keep their evil, and that iniquity is immortalized, you see, and is made forever. And that's basically what the river of fire was saying. I mean, I'll try to find a passage in the book, but that was the position of that Russian Orthodox person, right? I didn't agree with it, and then I was trying to tell them, look, man, the eternal fire of God does not preserve evil. It doesn't do any of this stuff. And yeah, they perceive, right? They can perceive God as hell, but if God is a purifying fire, well, even that perception, right, will cease. It's because if God consumes all that is not of eternal value, that does not reflect His eternal quality and nature, then it is consumed, and that would be self-condemnation. And he was talking about how, because he basically was saying that, well, what I'm describing, right? There was some more stuff that was said, but he said that what I was describing was apocastasis. He said, he said, careful, that's apocastasis. Orthodoxy hates that. And he said, good luck trying to reconcile that with an eternal willful disobedience. He said, because the angels are able to keep that up, so, good luck trying to reconcile apocastasis. And so, once again, it's this free will thing, I believe in free will, man, and I try to tell him, I told him, willful disobedience is also wickedness itself. I would say it's also could be a branch, could be a fruit of something, but it would produce wickedness. And that's why that's why when I'm trying to tell you that that is not preserved, because there's no eternal value in that. And you can know it's not eternal, not just because it doesn't reflect the eternal quality of God, but also in Christology, You can refute a lot of these heretical teachings in Christology. In Christ's humanity, when he assumed human nature for all humanity, right? And this does affect all the cosmos as well, because Christ is God, and through him all things are made. And like what I said, he assumed Adam's position as well. So Adam's willful disobedience that runs rampant in his humanity, that dies. Yeah, and that's what I'm talking about. It's an aspect of the refining fire. That it is the death of wickedness through the restoration of its righteousness, right? Through the restoration of righteousness. That's an aspect of the river of fire. It destroys and then restores. It only preserves what's eternal. That is God and what is like him and is in his image. All that stuff, and that's why I told him, like, there is no such thing as an eternal disobedient will. That's almost dualistic. God's not going to deify anything, or he's not going to give the incorruption to anything unworthy. You know what I mean? And so that's what I'm saying. Like, I did make a previous video on the river of fire and my problems with it. And that's what I was telling them. And then that's another thing about free will, dude. It's like, yeah, God respects free will, but remember, we're fallen. We don't exactly have, we're not free to practice our free will, because just like this book on therapy of spiritual illnesses, you're in constant attack by demons, and you're in a hostile environment. You're not exactly completely free. You have to be constantly watchful. You see what I mean? And plus, God, cast Adam out of the garden, so could no longer eat of the tree of knowledge. So God take out his free will as well, for goodness sake. And that's another thing, dude. Like, he kicks man out of the garden. I said this in my previous video, right? He chastises man out of loving compassion, throws him out of the garden, basically leads him out of the garden. And the purpose of that is so that they will not be immortal in that condition. You see what I mean? And then the river of fire clearly showed that God kind of contradicts himself a little bit, because he ends up immortalizing man while they're maintaining hatred for God. That's what I'm saying. We're talking about the love of God here, right? The eternal fire. See, that's not possible, because hatred for God is also wickedness. That will cease too. That will die. It's unholy. It's not going to be preserved or made worsen by God's presence. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, that's what I was telling the Orthodox, that Russian Orthodox, that you need to understand what the eternal fire is. It's a refining fire. It's not this idea that it's going to preserve your wickedness for all eternity. It's not going to preserve willful disobedience and hatred for God. That's not how it works. It's a refining fire. Fiery tests, fiery trials. It's something everyone must go through, especially the wicked. Some people are, just like the devil and his angels, some people are exclusively reserved for that day of judgment, So that's what I'm saying. You can, it doesn't matter if you want to preach apocastasis or not, or to not tell anyone about it. Good works, man, I mean, they're nice and all, but it's really about the image and likeness of Christ. His perfect love found in the soul, That's why Cain's sacrifice, is not accepted. It's not because he didn't bring what God wanted. It's just he didn't do it the right way. And you see, what was in his heart, because he murdered his brother. He didn't reconcile with his brother, whatever it was he had against him, He was a jealous person. And these people cast out devils who try to plead with God. Did we not cast out devils? Did we not prophesy in your name? And God said, I never knew you. You see what I mean? So they all did good works. So that's what I'm saying. I just don't see any reason why I should have to settle for the river of fire. I understand, I will humble myself, because I know Orthodoxy, as a church, she's run a certain way. I understand that. But it's I don't know, I mean, I'll tell you what my spiritual father told me. My spiritual father said, God's not obligated to, respect your false doctrine. You know what I mean? And that's what I'm saying. Because at the end of the day, you know, this book, I like it. I like the idea. But you don't have to twist and turn scripture and make God look foolish in the end. Because people who stress free will so much, you know, they try to reconcile. It's because they're trying to reconcile the idea of never-ending suffering and a loving God. You know, that can work with someone else's loving God. You know, that's why I wanted to have the Bible open. I wanted to quote from Jeremiah, where it says about the offerings made to Baal, and it says because they forsook me and alienated this place and offered incense in it to foreign gods, which neither they nor their fathers knew, and because the kings of Judah filled this place with blood of the innocent, and built high places for Baal, so as to burn up their sons in the fire, which things I did not command, or speak, nor consider in my heart. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when this place shall no longer be called the fall, or the graveyard, the son of Hinnom, right? And talk about how he'll bring it to desolation. You know, see that is the refining fire right there. You know, severe chastisement. And that's what I'm saying. It says that such a thought about offering sacrifices to Baal, like, I mean, such a thought that he would never think of, right? Like, he would not accept those sacrifices because they're evil, right? Like, offering your loved ones to God by burning them alive, right? It's like, that's what I'm saying, the logic of can it be reconciled? Never-ending suffering with not just a loving God, but our loving God, right? That's what these Christian apologists try to do, you know? That's why the Western teaching and the Eastern teaching are virtually no different, because the fire is not purifying. It never ceases never-ending suffering. It just allows it to continue and makes it worse. That's why it's the demonic fire. It preserves evil, you know? And like I said, God is the one that ultimately has the power to end it, you know? And so, like this passage said, you know, this stuff does not enter his heart or his mind. So why does the thought enter our minds? This thought of reconciling never-ending suffering with our loving God. You know, all it's going to do in the end is make God look foolish. You know, and the commentary says, it says, you know, talking about the word graveyard. It is so called because it's called graveyard because the Israelites had offered their children to Baal and Molech there. Also, this is a place where the people of Judah were to be buried after the siege or something like that. So, yeah, it was the Israelites who were doing that, you know, justifying that. You know, so I don't know. I mean, maybe they found a reason to reconcile the two absurd things, that the God of Israel would be okay with something like that or something. And they talk about, here's like the potter and the clay. I think, let me see. It says, this is in Jeremiah. It says that this is a passage referred to by St. Paul in Romans 9:21, and it highlights the apostle's attention. The ability of the potter to do what he wants with his pots is always present. But God is a good potter, does what his vessels, according to disobedience or obedience of the vessels. He makes good vessels, but vessels can choose evil and crumble in his hands without his intervention. But out of the rubble, the potter is able to recreate something beautiful. Yeah, because you see, like, you know, God's wrath is also not just bringing it, not just him himself, bringing the city to desolation or the soul to ruin. It could also be just allowing you to, you know, like the Pharaoh, the hardening of his heart. His heart was filled with pride or something, it was stubborn. And so God just let it become even more stubborn. You know, and I think the river fire talked about how the fire kind of hardens it even more, right? You have to keep it hardened until that way, through their own destruction, they will learn humility. Yeah, because that's one way to acquire humility. But notice it's not given eternal value. Like, it's not never ending. It ends with their destruction. And his book, it says, like, but out of the rubble, the potter is able to recreate something beautiful. Yeah, see, that's the purpose of it. Not just to leave it desolate. The same thing with Sodom and Gomorrah. I wanted to just quote from this book, Amazed by Grace, from Santa Clarko. This is one passage in the appendix. Because, yeah, it's a, I just want to quote from it because this is the appendix, because it kind of shows you, like, the nature of the eternal fire, right? Like, how it is with destruction of Sodom and stuff like that. And I just gotta find it. It says, that talks about the cup of wrath. Let's start with the imagery of the cup of God's wrath. Does this signify a permanent state of damnation? The phrase is very common in the Old Testament. Consider Jeremiah. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, said to me. Take from my hand this cup filled with the wine of my wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. When they drink it, they will stagger and go mad because of the sword I will send among them. So I took the cup from the Lord's hand, and made all the nations to whom he sent me, he made them drink it, Jerusalem and the towns of Judah, its kings and officials, to make them a ruin and an object of horror and scorn, a curse, as they are today. Pharaoh king of Egypt, his attendants, his officials, and all his people. That's Jeremiah 25:15-19. And it says, all nations, including Israel, can drink the very same wine from the same cup of wrath. There are not two different cups of wrath. Some have suggested that the cup of wrath for Israel means correction, but for the nations it means damnation. This is not acceptable, given this passage clearly paints a picture of all the nations, including Israel, drinking from the one cup. What happens to Israel when she drinks from the cup of wrath holds true for the nations. But this point is this. Drinking from the cup of wrath never describes a permanent, irreversible. Drinking from the cup of wrath never describes a permanent, irreversible state of damnation. When John speaks of the cup of wrath, he quotes Isaiah 51, and it says, notice the similarities. You who have drunk from the hand of the Lord the cup of his wrath, you have drained to its dregs. Isaiah 51:17. Here the cup of wrath has been experienced to the full, down to its very dregs. How did they experience this cup of wrath? And it says, these double calamities have come upon you. Who can comfort you? Ruin and destruction, famine and sword. That's Isaiah 51:19. At this time Israel had been captive to Babylon. They were experiencing the curses of the broken covenant of Leviticus 26. They had experienced God's cup of wrath to the full, right down to the very dregs. But this is a permanent, irreversible state. They are filled with the wrath of the Lord, with the rebuke of your God. Therefore hear this. This is what your sovereign Lord says, your God who defends his people. See, I have taken out of your hand the cup that made you stagger. From that cup, the goblet of my wrath, you will never drink again. I will put it into the hands of your tormentors, Babylon, who said to you, fall, prostrate, that we may walk on you, and you made your back like the ground, like a street to be walked on. Isaiah 51:20-23. And it says, can you see what is happening here? A person can experience the full cup of the wrath of God, right down to the very dregs, and yet this is not the end. God ends this experience in response to this by defending them, and finally removing and ending the cup of his wrath. There is nothing inherent in this phrase to indicate a permanent state of damnation. To the contrary, salvation flows from the full cup of God's wrath. One can drink of the cup of wrath and still pass from this to restoration. This is nothing present in this idea to mean that future hope of salvation is forever gone. And then this talks about sulfur, smoke, and fire forever. What about the smoke that ascends forever and the eternal fire mentioned in Revelation 14? Don't these suggest a permanent, irreversible state of damnation? John echoes the language of Sodom's destruction. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities with the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation of the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Early next morning, Abraham got up and returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah, towards all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. That's Genesis 19:24-28. And he says, notice the parallels with Revelation 14. Both speak of fire, burning sulfur, and even rising smoke. And then Jude describes Sodom as, likewise, Sodom and Gomorrah serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. Jude 1:7. It says, Sodom experiences eternal fire and serves as a model for God's end-time judgment as explicitly outlined in Revelation. So the fate of the lost world will be the same as that of Sodom. To this point, this is the point. Even such severe punishments results in restoration. And it says, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom and her daughters. They were haughty and did abominable things before me. Therefore I removed them when I saw it. Samaria has not committed half your sins. You have committed more abominations than they, and have made your sisters appear righteous by all the abominations that you have committed. So bear your disgrace. You also, for you have brought about for your sisters a more favorable judgment because of your sins in which you acted more abominably than they. They are more in the right than you, so be ashamed. And you also, and bear your disgrace, for you have made your sisters appear righteous. And it says, I will restore their fortunes, the fortunes of Sodom and her daughters, and the fortunes of Samaria and her daughters, and I will restore your own fortunes along with theirs. Ezekiel 16:50-53. So Sodom experienced all the same features as the hell text in Revelation 14, and yet eventually will be restored. There is nothing in any of this judgment rhetoric to suggest that people can't be saved even after the most severe judgments. You have to bring these ideas and read them into the text. Our Western conditioning has trained us to think in these ways, but the Bible writers surely did not. This is, did you notice that Abraham looked back on Sodom and saw rising smoke? The same thing is said of the lost nations. The smoke of their torment rises. It doesn't say that they were burning endlessly. And if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, 2 Peter 2:6. And it says, reflecting on the same sense, Peter tells us that Sodom was turned to ashes, gone, and that Abraham saw that smoke rising after it had already become ashes. Rising smoke doesn't mean that a thing is still burning. Sodom was gone, and the rising smoke was simply a memory of what had happened. It is simple. John drew heavily on Isaiah 34 in the same passage. Note the following similarities. For the Lord has a day of vengeance, a year of retribution, to upload Zion's cause. Edom's streams will be turned into pitch, her dust into burning sulfur. Her land will become blazing pitch, it will not be quenched night or day. Its smoke will rise forever. From generation to generation it will lie desolate, and no one will ever pass through it again. Isaiah 34:8-10. This is both passages speak about burning sulfur day or nights. Smoke rising forever. It says, please note something very important here. As a result of the unquenchable burning sulfur, Edom ends up empty and desolate. Nothing left there at all, and yet, for all this, the smoke rises forever. Smoke rising forever is clearly a figure of speech. There is no smoke arising here today in Edom, which is modern Jordan today, and neither is there fire, eternal fire, remember, burning in Sodom today. But there is more. It will not be quenched night or day. Its smoke will rise forever. From generation to generation it will lie desolate. No one will ever pass through it again. And the desert owl and screech owl will possess it. The great owl and the raven will nest there. So God will stretch out over Edom the measuring line of chaos and a plumb line of desolation. Isaiah 34:10-11. Yeah, did you get that? Owls will live and nest in a place that is supposedly experiencing eternal fire and is desolate. Just as Isaiah is telling us that God punished Edom for its sins against his people, so too John says that God will punish the beast and the nations likewise. In spite of all this powerful rhetoric, the persecution of nations in Isaiah, see my earlier chapters on Revelation, still all end up restored. My point is this: there is nothing at all in any of this judgment rhetoric to suggest an irreversible state. Edom's forever rising smoke is not still rising. Sodom's eternal fire is not still burning, and the fact is that after the judgment it will be restored. There is nothing in the language of hell text of Revelation to prove eternal conscious torment or instant annihilation. Both hell texts, as we have previously seen, end up with universal restoration. And it goes on to talk about judgment, plagues, and brimstone. Now, please note that he's not orthodox, right? Santo Calarco, but the idea is the eternal fire, that it consumes, a fire that consumes, and the river fire, and I have the river fire right here. Let me just find out what it says about the consuming fire. I have a lot of pages marked because I want to go over it. So it says here on page 31, for our God is a consuming fire, Hebrews 12:29, right? It says, this very fire which purifies gold also consumes wood, precious metals shine in it like the sun, rubbish burns with black smoke, all are in the same fire of love. Some shine and others become black and dark, in the same furnace still shines like the sun, whereas clay turns dark and is hardened like stone. The difference is in man, not in God. The difference is conditioned by the free choice of man, which God respects absolutely. God's judgment is the revelation of the reality which is in man. Right, and it says, the Saint Macarius writes, as the kingdom of darkness and sin are hidden in the soul until the day of resurrection, when the bodies are also of sinners shall be recovered with darkness that is now hidden in the soul, so also the kingdom of light and the heavenly image, Jesus Christ, now mystically enlighten the soul, and reign in the soul of the saints, but are hidden from the eyes of men, until the day of resurrection. But then the body also shall be covered and glorified with the light of the Lord, which is now in the man's soul, from the earthly life, right, from this earthly life. And so the body also may reign with the soul, which from now receives the kingdom of Christ and rests and enlightened with eternal light. Now, it says, we all receive God, like when he's quoting St. Peter, the Damascene, when he says, we all receive God's blessings equally, but some of us receiving God's fire, that is his word, become soft like beeswax, while the others, like clay, become hard as stone. And if we do not want him, he does not force any of us, but like the sun, he sends his rays and illuminates the world, and he who wants to see him sees him, whereas the one who does not want to see him is not forced by him. And no one is responsible for this privation of light except the one who does not want to have it. God created the sun and the eye. Man is free to receive the sun's light or not. The same is true here. God sends the light of knowledge like rays to all, but he also gave us faith like an eye. And the one who wants to receive knowledge through faith keeps it by his works, and so God gives him more willingness, knowledge, and power. Right? That's from the Philokalia. And let me see. And notice how it said that, like he even quotes it, right, that this fire consumes and purifies, right? And so the difference is in man, not in God. I said, okay, that's fine, but the thing is, though, the consuming fire is like I was describing, it's not going to preserve ungodliness, right? That's the whole point of the parables. That's the whole point of the lake of fire. You know, like it may illumine, but it's not actually preserving what is evil. And yeah, it depends. It depends on it really depends on God's judgment. Yeah, which, I mean, that's the only way you're going to get the weeping and gnashing of teeth. That because God is ultimately the one that judges you worthy of that. Yeah, it is based upon your works, but also God is the judge of those works. And then, so even though it acknowledged, right, that the consuming fire purifies things like gold and stuff like that, but in the end, right, like when he says he respects your free will and stuff, so when he's talking about consuming, right, he just the one thing that this fire does not consume is evil. It doesn't. It seems to be okay. Like, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't seem like Christ is the conqueror of hell. You know what I mean? It's like it lets him keep hatred for God in the end, which that's not possible. You know, if you're going to be consumed by fire, like I said before earlier, that unholy things do not last forever in the presence of holiness. That's why they're being tormented, and it is the restoration of the righteousness in the soul of these creatures that are in the lake of fire, that do not perceive God as merciful. In fact, how did the ones that perceive God as merciful, how did they go through that? Well, like Christ, they have to go through fiery trials and torments. Christ drank of the full cup of wrath, and it led to salvation. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, yeah, you can experience God as wrath or mercy, right? And it's all upon like that same thing, love, right? And it makes sense, right? Like it depends on your disposition, how you perceive God, right? But remember, God is a refiner's fire, yeah. But even that hell would subside or cease, because being in the presence of God is not. You see, the thing about that love is purifying. It's a purifying love, and it's not. If it's not purifying, it doesn't reflect the eternal fire of God, right? In a sense, purification of the soul. And it's really not. It's really not the love of God, right? It's not the eternal fire that burns up Sodom and Gomorrah and restores her. You know what I mean? So this does sound good on the outside, but it's just something about it does not add up, right? And that's what I'm trying to tell you. Like, it's missing that aspect of the refiner's fire. Like, it may acknowledge that it purifies, and destroys and purifies all these things, right? But it doesn't seem to do that at all. Like, let me see if I can find that. Let's see if I can find. Let me see. It says, now if anyone is perplexed and does not understand how it is possible for God's love to render anyone pitifully wretched and miserable and even burning as it were in flames, let him consider the elder brother of the prodigal son. Was he not in his father's estate? Did not everything in it belong to him? Did he not have his father's love? Did his father not come himself to entreat and beseech him to come and take part in the joyous banquet? What rendered him miserable and burnt him with his inner bitterness and hate? Who refused him anything? Why was he not joyous at his brother's return? Why did he not have love either towards his father or towards his brother? Was it not because of his wicked inner disposition? Did he not remain in hell because of that? And what was his hell? What is any separate place? Were there any instruments of torture? Did he not continue to live in his father's house? What separated him from all the joyous people in the house? If not his own hate, his own bitterness, did his father or even his brother stop loving him? Right? Was he not precisely the very love which hardened his heart, right, more and more? Was not the joy that made him sad, and was not hatred burning in his heart, right? And so, and it goes on to say, hatred for his father, hatred for his brother, hatred for the love of his father toward his brother, and for love of his brother towards his father. This is hell, right? The negation of love, the return of hate for love, bitterness at seeing innocent joy, to be surrounded by love and hate, right? This is the internal condition of all the damned, and they are all dearly loved. You see, it says this is the eternal condition of all the damned. And I think at one point it said that God gives them the incorruption. Yeah, it says right here, eternity and incorruptibility are the state of unchanging things. No alterations whatsoever can happen. Then only developments in the state chosen by free personalities, eternal or infinite developments, but no changing, no alteration of direction, no going back. The changing world we see around us is changing because it is corruptible. The eternal new heavens and new earth, which God will bring about in the second coming, are incorruptible. That means not changing. So in the new world, there can be no correction, whatever. Therefore, pedagogical punishments are no longer necessary. Any punishments from God in this new world of resurrection will be clearly without a doubt, an eventual act, inappropriate and motivated by hate, without any good intention or purpose. If we consider hell a punishment from God, then we must admit that it is a senseless punishment, whereas we admit that God is an infinitely wicked being. And so it says, as St. Isaac the Syrian says, he who applies pedagogical punishments in order to give health is punishing with love, but he who is looking for vengeance is devoid of love. God punishes with love, not defending himself. Far be it, but he wants to heal his image, and he does not keep his wrath for long. This way of love is the way of uprightness, and it does not change with passion to a defense. A man who is just and wise is like God, because he never chastises a man in revenge for wickedness, but only in order to correct him, or that others be afraid. That's Homily 73. And so we see that God punishes, and as long as there is hope for correction. After the coming resurrection, there is no question of any punishment from God. Hell is not a punishment from God, but a self-condemnation, as St. Basil the Great says. The evils in hell do not have God as their cause, but ourselves. Yeah, but then it says down here on St. Basil, it says, of the other evils, some are shown to be struggles for the proving of courage, while some are for the healing of sins, and some are for an example to make other men sober. Right, it's St. Basil. See, in this quote, it says, principally therefore. Yeah, but in this quote, right, in St. Basil, he's talking about of the other evils, some are shown to be struggles for the proving of courage. Yeah, that's the refining fire, you see. And then over here, he's talking about how it makes mention of Noah's time and Sodom's destruction, right? I said those are punishments that do not have the... There are also punishments which do not have the purpose of correcting anybody, but simply put an end to evil by putting an end to those who are propagating it. Yeah, but is hatred for God not evil? Yeah, and so that's what I'm saying. It says, oh, because you choose to hate God. Yeah, but who gave man the incorruptibility? Did not allow him to change. You see what I mean? So now the question is, well, who keeps who in hell now? That's God. You know, and why is your fire not consuming them? You see what I mean? And so that's what I'm saying. They're able to keep evil, and he basically immortalizes it. Because he's saying that is the unchanging condition of the wicked. So that's what I'm saying. And St. Basil, he quoted. And I'm trying to look for that quote where he quoted St. Basil, how the purpose of casting out man from the garden was to not immortalize the iniquity. And so down here it's talking about, for the purpose of the Son of God was manifested that he might destroy the works of the devil. 1 John 3:8. Yeah, but a creation that hates its creator is the work of the devil. That's what I'm saying. He never really purifies that bitterness, because the consuming fire would destroy that. That is the refining fire, that he would be chastised. You know, that's like saying if God sends out his word, it will come back void. It won't fulfill its purpose or something. No, when God sends it, it will fulfill it. Like the chastisements of the lake of fire will fulfill its purpose, which is the perfecting of the vessels to receive what is new. You know, the new earth and the new heaven aren't revealed until every tear is wiped away. That is the consequence of Adam's sin. And it doesn't just happen without the fulfillment of the lake of fire, the purification of the souls. It says, I'm trying to find that. It says, trying to find where he quotes. He said, "Does God not create death, but we brought it upon ourselves out of an evil disposition? Nevertheless, he did not hinder the dissolution on account of the affirmation causes, so that he could not make the infirmity immortal in us," right? And I'm trying to see where is he quotes, separation from God is death, separation from light is darkness. I think that's, yeah, that's where he's quoting it. And it is not light which brings upon the punishments of blindness. Death, says Maximus Confessor, is principally the separation from God. from which followed necessarily the death of the body. Life is principally he who said, I am the life. This says, why did death come upon the whole of humanity? Why did those who did not sin with Adam die as did Adam? Here's the reply of St. Athanasius' Sinnet. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it. Sinnet. We says, we become the inheritors of the curses in Adam. We are not punished as if we had disobeyed the divine commandment along with Adam, but because Adam became mortal, he transmitted sin to his posterity. We became mortal since we were born from a mortal, right? And then, yeah, but that's what I'm saying, like, you know, willful disobedience, right? All that stuff is part of the old Adam, right? Like, there can't be no trace of the old, and you know this through Christology. Christology, Christ does not carry sin and corruption in them, you know? So this all just reflects bad on God's plan. Yeah, because the fulfillment, being brought to fulfillment in Christ, which is the taking of the old and transforming it into the new, like the staff transformed into a snake by God, as Moses says, you know, behold the power of God. Yeah, like this. This is what I'm saying. It does undermine the plan of God. And then he quotes, let me see, where does he actually, he says it. Oh yeah, he says it towards the end. When he says, in the new eternal life, God will be everything to his creatures, not only to the good, but also to the wicked, not only to those who love him, but likewise to those who hate him. But how will those who hate him endure to have everything from the hands of him whom they detest? Oh, what an eternal torment this is, right? What an eternal fire, what a gnashing of teeth. Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting inner fire of hatred, said the Lord, because I was thirsty for your love, and you did not give it to me, and I was hungry for your blessedness, and you did not offer it to me. I was imprisoned in my human nature, and you did not come to visit me in my church. You are free to go where your wicked desire wishes, away from me, in the torturing hatred of your hearts, which is foreign to my loving heart, which knows no hatred for anyone. Depart freely from love to the everlasting torture of hate. Everlasting torture of hate. And then over here, when he said, depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting inner fire, I assume that's that passage that I quoted to my catechumen teacher, where those people pleaded with him, Lord, did we not do these things, cast out devils and all that? And saying, God is the one who says, I will cast them away. You know, it says, depart from me, I never knew you. So this really, that verse is not talking about self-condemnation, dude. It's talking about, like, you know, God casting judgment on them and casting them out away from the kingdom, you know. And so this is, yeah, this is, they are all living in God's kingdom. All these people that have hate in their hearts, is hatred for love, the negation of love, but they're all in God's kingdom. No, they're outside God's kingdom. You know what I mean? The dogs, adulterers, fornicators, haters of God, they're outside the kingdom of God. They're not in it. And that's the whole problem. Like, this book, it's like a bunch of ideas piled up on each other, and it just makes no sense. The only one good idea it had was that how you perceive God, as heaven or hell, right? According to your disposition, right? But that's the thing, though, if God is purifying fire, because it speaks a lot about God's love, but this love is proving to not conquer anything. What exactly is it consuming? It just seems to make self-condemnation forever. And so that's supposed to be the eternal fire. No, the eternal fire is what destroys evil, consumes evil, and preserves holiness. It does not preserve unholiness. Hatred for God is evil, and it's unholy, dude. That's not preserved by the everlasting fire. And then he said something like, in the, what he said, he says, I was in prison and all that. Yeah, that's like I said earlier, right? That God's not obligated to respect a wicked will of disobedience, willingly to be in disobedience. God never respects that. He destroys that will, and he punishes you for that, for doing that. And it says, depart freely from love to the everlasting torture of hate. I'm like, dude, look, at the end of the day, like, hatred for God is not everlasting. It's a dead work, because it produces dead works, produces wickedness and destroys. It's the hellfire of the devil, really. Like self-condemnation. I mean, if God's love is really greater than life itself, like it says in the Psalms, I think it would purify this hatred. What exactly makes someone bitter towards God? And should we really say that God's love is not powerful enough to purify it? I mean, don't you need help coming out of bitterness? You can't just do that all on your own, but yet this God ceases to purify. I know God is eternally consuming fire, so long as there's wickedness, of course. And yet, that's what I'm saying. What exactly does this fire purify? It says this fire will be kindled within man, seeing the cross. Some will rejoice, but others will fall into confusion, terror, and despair. Thus will man be divided instantly. The very state of man's soul casts him to the other side of the other, to right or left. I don't know what that means. It says the prophet Daniel, speaking of the last judgment, relates to how the Ancient of Days, the judge sits on his throne, and before him is a fiery stream. Daniel 7:9-10. Fire is a purifying element. It burns sins. Both to a man his sin has become a part of his nature, and the fire will burn the man himself. You see, fire is a purifying element. It burns sins. It is a sin to hate God. And then it says, that's what I'm saying, he eternalizes hatred for God. I'm like, well, what does he think the lake of fire is for? Is to purify that very thing, to destroy it, restoring righteousness. It says, but whatever you go in darkness of your hating hearts, my love will follow you like a river of fire, because no matter where your heart has chosen, you are, and you will eternally be my children. But this dad's love is terrible, It's like, I don't know, it's like, he says he respects their free choice. They hate him, but then he unites them to himself, and there's no purifying fire there. So